last year when we came to you, it was a roughly $30 million gap between where DESC was at and where they would need to be in order for all frontline workers to not be rent burdened. And unfortunately, as we all know, inflation and cost of living has continued to increase over that same time.
That's Lindsay Grad right there from SEIU Healthcare, 1199 Northwest, one of the unions pushing the city of Seattle to keep funding higher wages for workers on the front lines dealing with Seattle's opioid crisis and homelessness crisis. But where is that money going to come from? Seattle is still facing a sizable budget gap over the next 2 years. Remember that, folks. Plus, would you pay an $18 toll to use Highway 405? Woof, that's a tough one. And what's the latest on a shuffling of educational resources in Seattle public schools? Well, these stories and so much more come your way on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are mine, all mine. And I am joined by my co-host, David Croman, reporter for the Seattle Times. And David, I got to ask you, when you were out doing these different stories like bus ridership, we're going to be talking about that later on today, did you actually ride all 7,000 lines that you were reporting on for Seattle, for King County Metro? That was a lot of work you were putting in on that story.
No, I did not. I mean, there's the magic of data analysis, which is not my skill set, but fortunately, it's a spreadsheet that you can look at rather than actually needing to visit and count every single bus stop.
Okay. All right. Well, I know you're awesome, but that would have been actually superhuman. So that's something else entirely. David, thank you so much for breaking this down with me and always joining me on the show. Thanks also to our background noise sponsor, City Grind Espresso on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks also to our show patrons. A shout out to Jess. Thank you, Jess, for jumping on board last week. We would love to get your support at the $5 level, and we can send you your very own Seattle News, Views, and Brews decal. Help you also unlock the Patrons First content this podcast often offers. We feature photos of these stickers on Converge Media. It's a lot of fun. Our sticker shot of the week. We also connect with our patrons to help answer their questions about local politics as well. So we really encourage people to become a patron and make sure we watch this show also on Converge. Here's the video version of our podcast. You can see our smiling mugs on Wednesday nights at 7 o'clock. Big thank you to Converge. Thank you to Jess, too. And thank you to all of our patrons out there supporting the show. We really need it to keep it going. All right, let's keep this show going with Right Here, Right Now. All right, we're putting the budget front and center this week here, folks, on Seattle News, Views, and Brews for a few reasons. First, we got this first public hearing on the city budget happening on the 18th at 5 o'clock in the evening. If you are hearing this podcast before then, you want to get involved, head to seattle.gov/council. You can get the info you need to participate. And big heads up here, folks. Budget Chair Teresa Mosqueda will be releasing her version of the budget after she gets this input on Friday, so make sure you get to it here. But I should point this out. In a Monday Budget Committee session this week, we were learning a lot more about the continuing battle over wages for these frontline workers dealing with homelessness and the opioid crisis at the Downtown Emergency Services Center. Some background here, folks. These folks got a big raise over the past year, a 48% increase in January of 2022. The average worker now making about $29 an hour, about $57,000 per year. Median income in Seattle is about $110,000, if you wanted a point of comparison there. And just some more background on this. There was a big battle over this last year. The mayor was trying to roll back that 2019 law that said service worker wages should be tied to inflation. Workers successfully pushed back on that. And now council members are looking at this and they want to make sure these workers continue to get better wages so they can keep doing the job they are contracted to do with the city. But David, I'm not quite sure what we're going to see on Friday from the budget chair on this, but I'm just not seeing the reality check from the council yet on the fact that we're heading towards this potential $250 million gap for the next budget cycle. I want workers to be paid fairly. I know you do too. But where's this money going to come from? That's my big question right now.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it seems like one that they can sort of maybe kick down the road at least a little bit, which, you know, when there's as much turnover that's going to happen as will happen on the city council, you know, that's kind of tempting, especially with the council members who are no longer going to be here. You kind of deal with today and then figure it's someone else's problem next year. But, you know, I mean, this is this would be an investment that's not one time. If you're giving raises, you can't take them away. You know, so where that comes from, I don't know. I mean, I think we'll probably talk a little bit more, but they would probably need to revisit whether the jumpstart tax ends up being bigger than it is right now, or they find some other source of money, capital gains tax. The state Supreme Court has said that's legal now, and the legislature has been happy to enact one. The city hasn't yet. So that's a possibility. And then, maybe some hope and prayer that the forecast ends up looking a little bit better than it does right now. I don't know that that's going to happen. But, on the flip side of this, of course, it's like this industry of, service workers has huge turnover, and that has real effects and real harm that, you could make a pretty strong argument, I would think, that long term, losing as many people as the service industry does, is more expensive long term, because you're hiring and training people, and they're just frankly not as effective at doing their job. So I do think there's a payoff long term, but that doesn't really solve the short term problem.
No, and you make a really good point about turnover, and this was a point that the SEIU folks were making on Monday here. Essentially, with these higher wages, the vacancy rate, this turnover for jobs, which was about 36% in 2022. So imagine that, a number of these different workers just not returning to the job the next year. That 36% rate dropped to about 10%. So the turnover was a lot less with these higher wages. That makes sense. But again, Publicola was talking about this week, and I just wanted to go down this path as well with you. So the idea is Jumpstart is one of the big drivers here in terms of revenue for the city. This is the payroll tax on bigger businesses like Amazon, etc. And essentially what council is thinking about now is, okay, originally we said this was going to be for affordable housing, for the Green New Deal, things specifically like that. Now, maybe we should consider really just kind of throwing this into the general fund. And I really think about this, especially when you consider the fact that the prime architect for Jumpstart, Teresa Mosqueda, the budget chair here, will most likely be heading towards a county job next year as she's running for office in position 8 there at the county level. Looks like she might get that after a really convincing primary win. Talk to me about the future of Jumpstart, because I think that's something that this new council, especially the new council that's going to be stepping on next year, is really going to have to look at.
Yeah, and it's the intention originally was to, as you mentioned, spend it on housing and environmental policies, but that was all laid out in a resolution, which is not legally binding, so they can spend it however they want. And when you have as much turnover as what's coming down the road, then the next round of council members, most of them are not going to have been here when that revenue source was passed, and so for them it's not going to be as important that they follow that resolution to a T. The kind of irony here is part of the reason that they were so specific in how to spend it is because when they tried this before with the quote head tax, one of the big complaints was they weren't specific enough about how they were going to spend this business tax. So on round 2, they laid out in their resolution, we're going to spend it on these things. And now here we are. Of course, that was in the good times when the revenue forecast kept going up and up.
Yep.
Now that we're in the bad times, suddenly that list of priorities doesn't seem quite as important, even to people who were skeptical of the tax to begin with, like, Mayor Harrell. He's not in the world, he never explicitly opposed it, but he was not in the world of the kind of progressive world that pushed hardest for it. And now, he's happy to make use of it, but in sort of broad, more broad sense to kind of fill some of these general fund gaps.
Yeah, it's so interesting to see how this, now that these dollars are coming in, Mayor Harrell is more than willing to work on spending them in different ways. So, yeah, this is a big discussion ahead for the council, a big discussion ahead for people who would like to get involved with the public hearing. Again, that's 5 o'clock on the 18th for the Seattle City Council's public hearing. It's first of 2 on the budget for this year. If you'd like to get involved, seattle.gov/council. All right. I want to move on to another story here, David, a double dose of transportation this week for you, my friend. So the State Transportation Commission has a vote scheduled for Tuesday of this week to start public outreach for some possible changes, like tolling solo drivers on weekends, extending hours to toll 2-person carpools, and even boost the present-day $10 max rate on 405's express lanes up to $15 or even $18. Your colleague, Mike Lindblom, was writing about this, and that price tag for 405 especially just blew me away. What's this push for more dollars all about? Some thoughts on this, David?
Yeah, I mean, the push for more dollars is because the transportation system, I don't know what the opposite of a free fall is, a upward spiral of cost. It's just these highway projects that they're working on are exceeding their estimates by pretty astronomical amounts. The 405 167 project, I think was, I'm blanking on the exact number, but several $100 million more than what the engineers said it would be. They just got back an estimate for, or the bids for 520 over Portage Bay. They thought it would cost $800 million. The lowest bid was $1.3 billion. So they are seeing a sort of existential price escalation on large highway projects, large transportation projects. And, there are a lot of reasons behind that that we could go into. I wrote about one reason being kind of they're just not getting as many competitive bids, and contractors are just not willing right now to take on the level of risk that these projects require. And so they're basically charging more to cover that risk. But, there's more nuance to it than that. So, the legislature has a lot of problems they got to figure out and soon in this next legislative session. The kind of most immediate response that they have thought of and that I think we're hearing about today is, raising tolls on 405. That kind of is the most one-to-one correlation there. And so, it'll be interesting to see the vote is today, and I'm sure Mike will write about it. Be interesting to see what they eventually end up doing.
Yeah, and I thought Mike made an interesting point, and some of the commissioners are definitely wrestling with this. Are we turning these lanes, when we start talking about charging $15, $18, are we turning these into Lexus lanes, as it's been called, something that is only really afforded to the wealthy out there? The people that don't have as much aren't able to use them. Some thoughts about that, and just who these express lanes are supposed to be for. Are they just for people who can pay for them? Should they be for people who are of all income levels? This is a pretty challenging issue.
Yeah, and that's always the case. I think that always comes up when you think about tolling, especially when, it's one thing when everybody has to end up paying the toll. It's another thing when it's sort of opt-in in some ways. You don't have to use the express lanes, but the result is you do create sort of a class system of, the people who can afford it are going to get to work faster than the people who can't. You could probably make the same argument with 520. Some people just take I-90, but that's going to take longer. So, it always comes up. It is an equity issue. At the same time, tolls are in some ways the kind of, maybe behind gas tax is kind of the most simple way to pay for highway projects, because the people who are using it are the ones who are paying for it. It's pretty one-to-one in that sense. So it's tempting, and it's why it's coming up. But it's for a lot of people, they just don't have the option but to drive a car. Transit is not super reliable right now, or, in some parts of the county in particular, not, we'll talk more about this, but it's not super accessible. And so, it's not just rich people who are driving their cars to work, but it will be rich people who are paying $15 to drive in the express lane.
Yeah, and it's so interesting to look into that issue. And these tolls are higher in other parts of the country, folks, just to have an awareness of them. You can pay up to $60+ in some parts of Washington, D.C. if you take enough of these toll roads here. And I think the issue of it is there's been a certain guarantee for, okay, if you pay these tolls, then you will be going at least 45 miles per hour, let's say, on the freeway. And with the current level, that just ain't happening. And so I think there has to be, or there has been, some push at the state level to say, okay, what is the lever we can pull to make sure that we can deliver on that 45 mile per hour promise? And fortunately, unfortunately, however you want to look at it, it looks like those higher tolls are the avenue they have to do that, I guess. Is that kind of the reasoning here, David?
Yeah, you see this play out. It's sort of like with parking too. If you feel like there's not enough parking, you raise the rates, and suddenly people find ways other than driving their cars in to park, and you open up some spots. So it is short of building, massively expensive new highways and widening lanes. That is a way to free up a little space. Again, though, some people will find alternatives, take the bus or whatever it might be. For a lot of people, though, who don't want to pay that, it could and probably will mean that the other lanes that are not tolled slow down even more.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, David. Up next, a grim new record for our region in dealing with an out-of-control drug crisis. The details coming up on Now Hear This. The headline is one that is frightening, but perhaps not unexpected. Drug overdose deaths in King County have now eclipsed last year's record number, with 1,010 people killed this year as of early October, compared to 1,001 in all of 2022. Local agencies are doing what they can to fight back. Mayor Harrell spoke to this issue when he signed an executive order to fight Seattle's drug crisis back in April.
We have an obligation to do more from those suffering from substance abuse disorder for all of our neighbors. Fentanyl crisis is just playing out on our streets, and we see it every single day. It's playing out in our neighborhoods. We all are affected by this.
Now, as you might imagine, fentanyl is the primary drug to blame in these overdose deaths. 109 deaths from fentanyl in 2019, 846 so far in 2023. Amazing to see that increase there. David, I think my first question here, local agencies like the City of Seattle, King County Public Health, they are clearly focused on this drug crisis. Are they making an impact?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it feels a little bit like, trying to turn back the tide of the ocean in some ways. When you're combating against cheap and accessible drugs that are kind of everywhere right now, I frankly, if I knew exactly what to do about that, then I would solve it. Just get the sense that there's so much of it, and it's so easy to come by, and it's so addictive that, and it's so deadly. If heroin users who are going to fentanyl, there's a dramatic escalation of how deadly that is. And so there's only so much you can do when it comes to this drug.
Yeah, it feels like that too. I mean, the power of this drug is 50 times more powerful than heroin, and the dose that you'll find on the street. I've seen some of these stats here. 6 out of these 10 pills have a certain level of fentanyl in them that could kill the average person. It's absolutely amazing. And so there was one stat, though, that jumped out at me from this last week. The Como did a report on this. The fire department said, okay, we're reversing these overdoses. We are able to save lives in these cases. They bring someone back to life, but in 1 of 20 of those cases, those people will be back on the drug and dead within a year. And I think about this, access to Narcan, these other overdose reversing drugs, those really seem to be the key for public health agencies. And those are the keys they're touting to really fight this crisis. But is that providing the right answer? And I'm asking another wide open question here because I don't know what another option would be, but that whole concept of leading with those overdose reducing drugs or reversing drugs here. Some thoughts about that. This is a challenge.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never heard anyone argue that Narcan isn't the answer.
Right.
My sense of it has always been it's a way to buy a little extra time.
Right.
It's in some ways a harm reduction approach, which is it's a way to keep people alive, and that's kind of what it is. I don't think Narcan is a substitute and nor a solution. I mean, some of its relatives in buprenorphine might be a little closer to that, but getting access to that and staying on it is a challenge, of course. So no, I mean, I think Narcan is a great resource to keep people from dying. I don't know that it's a great resource to reverse the larger trends that we're seeing.
Yeah, you're right. It does feel like that Band-Aid that brings us to that next level of, okay, what other treatments are you going to be able to put with this? What other services are you going to be able to connect people with? And I think that's the ongoing challenge here. And I know I always ask you impossible questions about this, David, but I think it's important to engage in because I know this is something that our local agencies are doing too. This is something that the city's talking about, the county's talking about, and these numbers, especially what we're talking about here, more than 1,000 deaths, overdose deaths in King County. We're not even through the end of the year. That is not a record that anybody wanted to be talking about. I did want to move on to another issue here, some challenges in Seattle public schools over the last couple of weeks as our school system reshuffles some of its assets amid plans to cut services following some major budget concerns due to lower enrollment. So this was happening last Monday. Dozens of classrooms across Seattle reconfigured to meet state class size requirements. Some students got a new teacher, others had to jump into split grade classes. A lot of parents upset about this. Superintendent Brent Jones apologized for the disruption, but these parents are asking, why did this need to happen in October? Why wasn't this going on in the first weeks of September as school started? Some thoughts about what Seattle Public Schools is going through right now.
Yeah, the school world is sort of its own animal.
It is.
Its own kind of specific politics and government. I would say that this isn't specific to Seattle Public Schools. It seems like a lot of public schools are seeing declining enrollment and therefore declining revenue and are making hard decisions. We've talked about Eastside as closing schools, and I don't know that you could find a public school district right now that isn't dealing with some version of this. There are no great ways to address that. I mean, it's not great for the families who are still there to see cuts as a result. I don't know enough about this to know if there's some school district out there that has like a great answer to these larger questions. But it seems like Seattle Public Schools is going through it in the same way that other school districts are.
Yeah, I suppose that's right. And I guess my bigger question is how to reverse that trend, because it's almost like a problem that starts compounding upon itself. So enrollment is low. Okay, we're going to have to cut a few things. Then the people that have stayed in the system are saying, wait a minute, why do we want to be enrolling here if these services are not up to the level that they were? Can you see that trend happening here? It just doesn't seem like it's going in the right direction right now. And that's another piece of this as well, I think.
Yeah, right. No, I think that's right. I know that some people are pushing the legislature to spend more money on the schools to reverse, to, kind of put a stop to that downward spiral. The big revenue source of the legislature that's seeing big growth is the carbon sales, but that couldn't be used for schools. But, maybe other programs that are environmental from the general fund could be shifted. You can maybe move money around and sort of free up some money for the schools. I know that's something people are pushing for. There's also sort of larger questions. We had the McCleary decision, which forced the legislature to spend more on schools. But, one constitutional question that hasn't, I don't think, been resolved yet is around property tax levies and, certain schools being able to pull more from, the local residents to how you have a lot. You can't spend it directly on teachers, but you can have a lot more after school programming and a lot more, teachers' aides and things like that than other schools. So, I know there's been some fight over the sort of constitutionality and fairness of that, which is that, Mercer Island or whatever, that a lot of funding, schools like Rainier Beach, maybe not. So, I think that's also a larger question that people are going to look at, is sort of how you distribute resources a little bit better. But again, none of those are, well, the legislature might be a short-term fix. The sort of larger questions around how schools are funded broadly are probably not going to solve this problem.
True. And it's interesting to point out also that there are a number of different PTA groups around Seattle where, let's say, some individual school area has a very strong PTA. Another school might not have as strong a PTA. Even those agents, or those groups, I should say, are working on banding together and trying to figure out how they distribute their resources, people and dollars, to try to make sure that all these schools are equitably served by a PTA. So, there's a lot of moving pieces here. And I know this is a difficult one to work through. Schools are a labyrinthine process to try to work through in terms of their management and their government. But it's definitely something impacting a lot of people in Seattle. And David, I thank you for jumping in and talking about that with me. All right, well, coming up, bus ridership. We touched on this earlier. We know it is down across our region, but not every bus stop has the same story. Find out where transit is almost back to pre-pandemic levels and what that means. David's going to break it down here on Transportation Talk. David, you had a great piece recently in the Seattle Times with some of your colleagues researching 7,000 bus stops all across King County. You and other outlets have definitely been reporting that bus ridership is down. But you, in this report, found out that that's not necessarily the case for all of the transit stops out there. Talk to me about this report. This is a really interesting find, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those stories where I don't think the findings are going to surprise anyone all that much, myself included. But it's interesting to take assumptions and test them and, put some quantitative analysis behind them and prove them out. So, I don't know that anyone would be surprised to learn that, richer and oftentimes whiter areas of King County, with more flexibility to work from home and, more access to cars and parking and things like that, the bus ridership there fell faster and has not come back as quickly. Whereas parts of the county, say Rainier Valley or Tukwila or South County, up in North County, in Shoreline area too, that the ridership there didn't fall quite as far and is coming back more quickly. Again, I don't know that necessarily would surprise anybody. And, the bus systems before the pandemic sort of understood that some of the most reliable customers tended to be lower income or middle income kind of working class folks who are commuting in. It's just kind of interesting, though, to lay it out in a map, which is thanks to the work of Manuel, who's a great data analyst, and Aileen, who kind of knows how to map all this stuff, and see that actually laid out in King County. And then, there's a next step to this, which is when you look at this data of like who Metro's most reliable customers are, how does that inform how they structure their bus system? Because Metro has always been really good at providing commutes. It was one of few bus systems actually before the pandemic that was actually growing in ridership, and a lot of that was because they had really easy and frequent commuter lines. But of course, commuter lines are the ones that have been the most disrupted. So the question is, how and when does Metro think more broadly about sort of off-peak service and weekday service and service within neighborhoods in the areas where the people apparently need it and use it the most? And I think that again, I don't know that we're telling Metro anything they don't already know. But I thought it was important to lay it out in a sort of visual format that could be easily seen and understood.
Oh, yeah. Right. And is it that extra step of more service in those neighborhoods that's going to help grow ridership? Is that the answer here? I feel like that might be one part of the question. Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's it is the ridership level meeting, matching the level of service down there, or is there more demand that would be filled if you were to bring more service down there? Or, that more generally, maybe that's, there's some debate around whether ridership is in fact the best way of measuring transit success, because, if your bus isn't well ridden, but the 10 people who use it, it's really important for them to get to their jobs. If you were to just look at ridership, maybe you take away that bus, but for those 10 people, that can be the difference between getting to their job at all or not having that job. And so, it just some questions around, how Metro should be structured in a post-pandemic world that both kind of meets the demands of the commuters who are slowly coming back, while also sort of looking a little different to meet the realities of the fact that, the pandemic made clear that there are certain people who rely on the bus regardless of circumstance, and that maybe their needs and demands should be, met a little more robustly than they were before, perhaps.
That's fair. Great piece, David, and thank you for breaking down all those pieces with me about it. Let's wrap up here. Need to get going here for this week. David, as we get closer to the World Series, I am heartened, I think, a little bit by the fact that teams like the Mariners, i.e. teams that didn't win 100 games this year, are doing great in the playoffs. So maybe in future years, we're going to get rewarded somehow for winning 54% of our games. How do you look at that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm giving up. When you look at the Rangers, they look suddenly really good. They will probably fix their bullpen in the offseason, and suddenly I think they're going to be the team to beat for a long time. I think, unfortunately, the Mariners are going to be competing for wild card spots for a long time. But, if you can make it into 7 out of 10 of the next wild cards, then that gives you a pretty good chance, maybe, to get to a World Series, which I think was basically Jerry DiPoto's argument, even though none of that is very inspiring.
I know. It's just like, let's win 54%. Just doesn't have a good ring to it. Yeah. Never has, never will. But David, thank you as always for joining me here. Thanks everybody for listening to Seattle News, Views and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. This podcast is on Apple, Spotify, wherever you like to listen. Please also find Seattle News, Views and Brews on Patreon. Show your support there. $5 a month is a small price to pay. We really appreciate you supporting independent journalism. Thanks for watching on Converge Media too. See you next time.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2023.